Welcome into OutKick the show. I am your fearless leader, Clay Travis. I hope all of you are having fabulous Wednesdays wherever you may be across this country. I've got a lot to dive into. We're going to have a great deal of fun. But I want to say right off the top, I told you guys yesterday, when I gave out the prize picks, I was like, I don't see any way that this loses. Not quite doubling your money, but with ease. Not even remotely close. We now have won 2 straight prize picks in the world of college basketball. And for a refresher, I'm all in on March Madness now. Cannot wait for the brackets to come out. But last night I told you, hey, Chaz Lanier is going to have more than 1.5 made threes. I said this is basically stealing. He had 3. I told you Zakai Ziegler is going to score more than 11.5 points. This feels like a cakewalk. Nearly there by halftime. He ended up with 17. And I told you Walter Clayton Jr., great guard ball player for the Florida Gators, was going to have over 1.5 made threes. He had 3. It wasn't just that we won. It was that for a second straight week, our prize picks cakewalk. So there you go. 2 wins in a row. We'll give you another one next week. Credit to the Georgia Bulldogs. Phenomenal win last night over the Florida Gators. First win for Georgia over a top 5 opponent since 2004. An entire generation of Georgia basketball had passed without a team winning a game of that significance. They held on. They were up big, nearly gave it away, came back late after giving up the 26-point lead, I think it was, to get the win over the Florida Gators, throwing the SEC even more into chaos. There is a possibility, I think it's being really under-discussed, that 14 different SEC basketball programs could make the NCAA tournament this year. Let me repeat that. 14. And let me just share this. I think the people at the top of the SEC, helmed up by Commissioner Greg Sankey in particular, this is one of the greatest turnarounds in the history of a major sport. It wasn't very long ago that only 2 or 3 SEC teams were competing to make the NCAA tournament. Right now, you've got potentially 3 getting number 1 seeds, and as many after that Georgia win as potentially 14. 14 teams are in the mix to make the college basketball NCAA tournament from the SEC. Sorry, guys. But the only 2 teams that are completely out, unless they win, obviously, the tournament in my hometown of Nashville, are South Carolina and LSU. The other 14 SEC fan bases in men's basketball have legitimate chances to make the NCAA tournament, with Saturday being the beginning of, I would argue, officially March Madness. Am I correct about that? I think Saturday is March 1st. So, that is coming. Speaking of madness, this is kind of funny. I have become my dad in many respects now that I have a 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 10-year-old. Tonight, my 8th grader is his school. They've started the state basketball tournament, early playoff rounds, however you want to classify it. And so he said, Dad, I want to stay after school today. I'm going to go with my friends. I want to make sure I watch the game. And I was like, yeah, I totally get that. My middle son plays basketball, football, and lacrosse, all 3 of those sports. And by the way, I don't know anything about lacrosse. I went to his game last year, and I was standing on the sideline, and I had to pull up the lacrosse Wikipedia page. And I was pulling it up. I was like, I'm sure lacrosse is racist somehow, because everything you read about on Wikipedia, it's like, oh, this is the racist background of I didn't even know the rules. I was watching a YouTube tutorial on the sideline. I had no idea what was going on. Fun sport to watch, by the way. Still have no real idea what's going on. It's the only sport any of my boys have played that well, we did hockey. When they were really young, we did like a Nashville Predator hockey camp. But I've seen enough hockey games at this point to have some idea what's going on. But that's the only sport my boys had played prior to this one that I myself had never personally played. So he reaches out and he says, Dad, I want to stay for the game. Can you pick me up after the game? He can't drive. And so wife says, hey, game's going to be over. Can you pick him up at 7:30? And I was like, pick him up? I'm just going to go watch the game. So I remember my dad doing this where, and maybe some of you out there are dads or you remember your dads doing it. I'm now going to be solo watching a game without any of my kids in it because I don't want to just drive and pick him up. So I remember this, and my dad would be like, well, I'm just going to come sit and watch the game. You look over and your dad's just there. So that is what I am now doing for tonight, Wild Night. I'm going to sit around and watch high school basketball tournament play. Several stories that are out there that I think are significant. The new criticism, outside of the world of sports, by the way, the new criticism of Donald Trump is that he's a dictator because he's trying to control the media too much. Now, this is laughably absurd. The data reflects that Trump has taken around 10 times as many different questions so far in his first month in office as Joe Biden did, as Barack Obama did, heck, as even Donald Trump himself did in his first term. What this is really about is not trying to control in any way what people say. It's who has access in front of you to what you say. And let me make an analogy for you. I am nowhere near the president of the United States, but we have around 500 AM, FM affiliates in the Clay and Buck network. You might well imagine a lot of those stations regularly want either me or Buck to come on as a guest on their program. For the most part, we aren't able to do that because there are 500 stations, and once you start doing some of them, all of them start expecting it. So we typically are not guests on the stations that cover us. That's not restricting those stations' First Amendment speech. They can say whatever they want. The president doesn't have an obligation to talk to anyone. But if you were concerned that the president wasn't talking to anyone, the person to have been concerned about was Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who were doing almost no interviews. Trump has answered 10 times nearly the questions that Joe Biden did in his first 30 days. In fact, I think there's a strong argument that Trump is the most media-accessible president in any of our lives. A dictator would not be taking open questions all the time or sitting for interviews with everyone out there under the sun, as Trump is doing. All this is about is who's going to have access to you in a situation where the president is constantly being flooded with offers. And let me give you an example. I requested in my media career the president of the United States many different times. I requested Barack Obama when we did local sports talk radio in Nashville. I requested Donald Trump, requested Joe Biden. I got a call. I've interviewed Trump 10 times now, including multiple times while he was president. The president can talk to anybody. Virtually every media outlet on the planet will talk to him. I got a call, I think it was in like March of 2020 or thereabouts, from the White House, and they were saying, hey, we know that your sports talk radio show is popular. Would you be willing to have Donald Trump on the show? And I was like, yes, of course. You tell me when, we'll make it happen. My point is, the president is overwhelmed by media offers, and he can only do one in every 10,000 probably interview requests that he gets. And that's why they have the open forums, and that's why Trump answers as many questions as he can. But the president says no to almost everybody that asks to interview the president anywhere. And I have been told this for years, personally, because we try to get the president on. President doesn't respond, doesn't come on. I'm sure Trump's going to be on with us on Clay and Buck in the near future. As president, we've interviewed him a ton without him being president. What really matters is not what outlet is sitting in the room. It's how many people are able to hear what the president of the United States thinks. And the answer is, never has there been a more accessible president by the numbers in terms of questions asked and questions answered than Donald Trump right now. To complain in any way, as the AP is doing, that you are not being given enough access as the American public to the president of the United States is laughably absurd. The AP can write whatever they want. Trump is answering every question on every subject under the sun, including some that I never even thought about, which we're going to discuss here in a little bit, the idea of a golden ticket. And so this current universe is falling on flat ears. In particular, I saw this story coming out earlier. Jake Tapper has now got a book that he is bringing out. And the book is about the cover-up that surrounded Joe Biden's mental and physical deterioration. And it's called Original Sin. And I give credit to Alex Thompson, who is his co-author, because Alex Thompson actually asked a lot of difficult questions comparatively about Joe Biden's mental and physical deterioration. Jake Tapper was among the media cabal, the media elite in legacy media, who decided to ridicule anyone who asked questions about the mental or physical well-being of Joe Biden as being unacceptable. I know about this because NBC News wrote a story about me like 10 days before the June 27th presidential debate, saying that I was spreading fake news by writing about and talking about Joe Biden's mental and physical deterioration. All of those stories vanished as soon as June 27th happened. But remember, Karine Jean-Pierre tried to label those cheap fakes. She tried to come out and tell us all that Biden was actually the best version of himself. Joe Scarborough argued it. Joe Scarborough actually told his Morning Joe audience, this is the best version of Biden there's ever been. Not only had he not deteriorated, Joe Biden was, according to Morning Joe, the best version of himself that he had ever been. Morning Joe's audience down 50% since the election. CNN's audience has also collapsed. There's actually more Democrats watching Fox News now than watching CNN or MSNBC. Why? Because over time, when you are lied to, your audience eventually feels insulted, they feel betrayed, and they decide they're going to go elsewhere. And that's why we keep growing at OutKick. I'm not telling you that I'm going to be right about everything. I'm wrong about a lot. When I get a fact wrong, I try and come correct it with you. But if you listen to Clay and Buck, which is setting new ratings, highs, if you read OutKick, which is setting new ratings, highs, if you watch this show, which is getting clipped and watched millions of times every day now, if you watch this show over time, you will see that I try to be as transparently honest with you as I can every day. Doesn't mean I'm going to be right about everything. But I read all the time at all of the stories out there and try to bring you, because I know many of you are busy, the best things that you should know about the biggest stories that are out there circulating. And so I think when MSNBC and CNN tried to argue that Joe Biden was fit, that he was mentally competent, and in case of Morning Joe, that he was the best version of himself that he'd ever been, their trust factor went up in flames on June 27th at that debate, such that now Jake Tapper's doing a story about the cover-up of Biden's mental and physical decline that's going to be out in a couple of months. Now, we told you all these stories were coming, but my question for you is, okay, Jake Tapper, why did you ridicule anyone who raised this as an issue for years on your program, and now you're telling us the behind-the-scenes story with 200 Democrat Party interviews that suddenly you're allowed to tell because Joe Biden stepped down and lost? Again, I think this is significant. And I think it also ties in with the decision that Jeff Bezos made today. Jeff Bezos said, we're going to remake the Washington Post opinion section. I give him credit. And I want to make sure that I get the description correct of exactly what he said, because I do think it's consequential. He came out this morning and he published the model that he had shared. And he said, I'm writing to let you know about a change coming to our opinion pages. We're going to be writing every day in support and defense of two pillars, personal liberties and free markets. We'll cover other topics too, but viewpoints opposing those pillars will be left to be published by others. Good for Jeff Bezos. Personal liberties and free markets as the focus of the Washington Post's opinion section. Good for Bezos. I've said for a long time, I went to college in Washington, D.C. I consider being able to read the Washington Post at that time, 97, 98, 99-ish, before every newspaper was available online. Those of us who grew up in cities without a great newspaper did not have as good of an educational experience as those of us who did. Now, look, I grew up reading the Nashville Tennessean. We're in the process of moving right now in the Travis house. And I was going through a lot of the letters, which I saved, that my dad in particular sent to me when I was in college. Do you know what a huge percentage of the things that he sent to me were? Articles about my favorite sports teams from the local Nashville Tennessean. Articles about the University of Tennessee football program. Articles about all the things relating to sports, Tennessee Titans moving to Nashville, or the Super Bowl run of the Titans. Being away from your hometown in a pre-internet era meant that you were not exposed to everything out there that was being shared. And so it was super important for me to be able to experience those stories, but I had to read them coming from the mail. Nowadays, you just go online, you can be a subscriber, any city in the world. You can know exactly what everybody's talking about in your hometown. You can follow your hometown sports teams. That wasn't the case then. And so when I look at it and I look back on it, I loved reading the Washington Post because back then Tony Kornheiser, Mike Wilbon, they were wildly entertaining, but they had a big, broad coverage range of a huge variety of subjects. And I've used this example before, but I remember waking up and seeing the Washington Post break the story of Monica Lewinsky having an affair with Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton, then the president of the United States, being engaged in an illicit relationship with an intern. The Post broke almost all of those stories because they covered Bill Clinton at the time like they covered Richard Nixon during Watergate. There was only about a one-generation difference. It didn't matter that Clinton was a Democrat and that that Nixon was a Republican. They covered the scandals the same way. That's what the paper of record in the nation's capital should do. But then when Trump got elected, they turned their coverage of Trump, they put Democracy Dies in Darkness at the top of the newspaper, and they covered Trump like he was a criminal. And then when Joe Biden came into office, by and large, they mostly ignored all of the conflicts surrounding Biden. The Hunter Biden laptop, the relationships of Hunter Biden with Burisma, with Ukraine, with Chinese interests. They didn't break any of those stories. because they had become a propaganda wing of the Democrat Party. Now, Jeff Bezos is so wealthy. He bought the newspaper for $250 million. I think by and large, he was focused on Amazon, and he wasn't actually paying attention to the Post on a day-to-day basis. I think what happened is he moved to Miami. He got a hot girlfriend, credit to him, Lauren Sanchez. He has a spectacular home in Miami, which I believe is Jeff Bezos' hometown. He now is super ripped. He's probably got triple the testosterone level right now that he had 15 years ago. And he is looking around and thinking about what his legacy is. And he doesn't want part of his legacy to be that he owned a far left-wing newspaper, which was fundamentally opposed to American exceptionalism. And I think he saw with Elon Musk, and I think he saw with Donald Trump, that actually he had more in common with those guys than he thought. And I think he lost his fear of speaking out about it. And so I give credit to Jeff Bezos. One of the most difficult things out there is recognizing that you were wrong. I think if we allowed more people to acknowledge publicly that they were wrong, the nation would be far better off. I've been wrong on a ton of things over my career. Acknowledging when you're wrong is actually the only way you can really grow. I'll give you an example. I lost $50,000 trying to sell college football colored pants. You can Google it. You can go read about it. I lost that money when I didn't have that money to lose. When that was a lot of money to me. Still a lot of money. But frankly, I can lose $50,000 now. I mean, I don't know. Right? Every 5 minutes in the stock market, I'm up or down way more than that. But at that point in time, I was, and it was, a significant dollar figure to me. When you fail, you learn something from failure. When you're wrong, you learn something from it. I talked about this in the wake of COVID. I was wrong in March and April of 2020 because I took the numbers on COVID from China as legit, and I tried to extrapolate them to the United States. By May, I would say the 1st of May, we basically knew everything that we needed to know about COVID, but I was wrong with some of the numbers that I shared in March and April of 2020. I was wrong. And I learned, hey, you know what? Can't rely on Chinese data. But from May of 2020 on, I was right about almost everything related to COVID. But I've gone back and said, you know what? I blew it March and April. I was wrong. I learned from those mistakes. I got better going forward. Acknowledging that you're wrong isn't a failure. It's actually a requirement to end up being right, because otherwise you end up doing what the government did, what the media did covering the Joe Biden government. You continue to argue something that is not true based on the facts. I'll change any opinion I have if you can show me data that shows that I am factually inaccurate on something. And I would encourage all of you to be the same way. And I give credit. I think Jeff Bezos recognizes now they got it wrong. And he's trying to fix it. And he's got a great American brand with the Washington Post, but he allowed it to be destroyed, and now he's trying to fix it. So I give him immense credit on that. Jake Tapper, not as much. I haven't seen him come out and say, hey, my coverage was wrong. Turns out I should have been way more skeptical about Biden's cognitive decline, and I shouldn't have carried water for the Biden White House when all of the evidence was right in front of me that I was missing the story. I want to close out here with an example of why I really genuinely respect Trump as a leader. If you told me right now, Clay, what are you most concerned about in the country on a big picture level? My answer is our national debt. We are $36 trillion in debt. And much of the conversation about that debt deals with how can we slow down the rate at which we are adding national debt. That is, very few people, Democrats or Republicans, come forward with a plan to actually start to pay down the national debt and reclaim control of our national economy. Right now, 86% of our national budget is Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, and national defense. The other 14% of the budget is everything else. But if you say basically we're not cutting 86%, it becomes very difficult to ever manage and balance the budget. Trump came out with an idea that I've never heard anybody talk about, at least publicly. He said we should be selling American citizenship $5 million for a gold card. If 1 million people sign up for this, that's $5 trillion. If 10 million people sign up for this, this is $50 trillion. It would wipe out our entire national debt. He wants all of this money to go to paying down the national debt. It's genius. I love it. In fact, I would love to be a part of this as giving back to the nation, because the business person in me immediately thinks, okay, what is the total addressable market here? That is basically how many people around the world are worth $20 million or more. Because if you're going to stroke a check for $5 million, you probably need to be worth around $20 million. And again, this is talking about liquid versus non-liquid wealth, right? I'll give you an example of how that is. A lot of people's wealth is tied up in their home. Let's say you've got $1 million house. Doesn't really make you a millionaire, because if you sell that home for $1 million, you're going to have to find a new place to live, right? And whatever you sold that home for, even if you dial it back to $500,000, you're going to have to pay capital gains. You're only putting, $300,000 or $400,000 into the bank, and you might have $1 million in assets, but having millions in liquidity is far different. Most people, if they're going to stroke a check for $5 million, need to be worth, I think, $20 million. Right now, we give away American citizenship to anybody who illegally enters into the country and has a baby here. That is effectively the cost of American citizenship, which is a huge asset, is zero. If you're in China right now and you can afford to fly to the United States and you are 7 months pregnant and you can have a baby here, your child gets American citizenship, and then you can fly right back to China. If you are in Mexico, if you're in Brazil, if you're in Argentina, if you're in Portugal, if you are in any country around the world, Kenya, Angola, wherever you might be, if you can make it to the United States and you have a baby here, your child is automatically a citizen, and that costs you only your travel cost. Zero is what we are charging for American citizenship. We should be charging a lot more. It's one of the best assets in the world. All of us, if you are watching or listening to me right now, the greatest privilege of most of our lives is our good fortune to have been born in America. So, how in the world is it that we are not taking advantage of that tremendous asset to make life better for everybody here? To me, it's a no-brainer. I never thought about it, but as soon as I hear it, I think it's genius. The question is, how many people could do it? Buck said on the show, and I don't disagree with him, we should bump it up to $10 million. Selling that golden ticket to super rich people and entitling them to American citizenship as a result, and guaranteeing that you use all of that money to pay down the national debt, would be tremendously beneficial to every American. The biggest issues that we have right now, many of them are connected directly to the national debt. Why are your mortgage rates 7% now? Because our inflation has skyrocketed, partly because of the amount of money we're having to borrow. Why are your credit card interest rates often over 20%? Why is your personal loan rate as high as it is? Why, despite the fact that we have cut the overall Fed lending rate, has the 10-year bond not come down in commensurate quality because there is a fear of embedded inflation, and we have diminished the value of the dollar overall. And we are now spending in the years ahead more on merely servicing the debt of the national debt than we are on the entire military, which according to economic law, Ferguson's law, I think, suggests that a country is in decline. As soon as you start spending in world history more money servicing your debt than protecting your country, you have begun an inevitable decline. So how many plans out there have you actually seen anybody put forward to address in any way our huge national debt? I've seen hardly any. I love everything about this. It would be incredibly beneficial to every American. I give credit for Trump for putting it out there. I don't see it as a Republican plan or a Democrat plan or an independent plan. I see it as a common sense plan designed to fix our biggest, in my opinion, looming issue, which is our $36 trillion debt, which is massively increasing, and the interest on it is curtailing in many ways what we are able to do to invest in Americans. So I love it. I would do it. I would get this plan underway. I think it's genius. All right. I will be live with you guys tomorrow, Thursday edition, Clay and Buck. Appreciate all of you hanging out with me. This has been OutKick the show. DBAP, unless you need to SBAP.